Welcome to Setting the Stage, Conversations in Performing Arts Health, a webinar focusing on the research and the work of scholars, musicians in the performing arts health setting. My name is Brian McGoldrick. I'm a second-year PhD student in the UNT TCPAH PhD program in Performing Arts Health. I have a related field in research measurement and statistics, and today I have a very special guest, accomplished performer, researcher, and administrator, currently interim dean at the Florida State University College of Music, Dr. Michael Thrasher. Dr. Thrasher, welcome.
Thank you so much, Brian. Glad to be here today.
Yeah, thank you. And boy, do we have a ton to talk about. And first things first, just because of your place in our work here and kind of being near the conception of the center and everything like that, what got you into this discipline, into this area of performing arts health? And I guess as a follow-up, what did some of that early work here at the TCPAH look like?
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me provide a little bit of background on my own experience. So I started graduate school at the University of North Texas in the fall of 1994. I entered as a master's degree student in clarinet performance and continued after completion of the master's degree into the doctoral program in clarinet performance at the University of North Texas. During the course of my program of study there, in addition to my primary coursework, I also took some supplemental courses in music education and in musicology. And during one of my semesters there at UNT, I signed up for a class in research methods, research methodology, taught by a rather young faculty member at UNT named Dr. Chris Chesky. And I very much enjoyed the class. I'm very much interested in research, and at the time, of course, learning more about the methodology and how research works and how studies are set up. So I found it to be a fascinating class, but it also was at the time frame when Dr. Chesky's research program really was beginning to solidify, and he had some fantastic ideas about research programs moving forward, looking at musician health issues. And being young and always interested in jumping into something new and interesting, I very quickly began poking around saying, hey, what can I do? How can I help? How can I be involved in that? That sounds fascinating. And really wanting to tie in my primary field as a clarinet performer with this field of research and how we can teach musicians better, teach clarinet better. I began to get involved, and we were talking about some programs that he had underway at the time. And it led to a really great collaboration that continued for the next several years at the very formative stages of the what was at the time going to be called the Texas Center for Music and Medicine. Mm-hmm. So I very much enjoyed that. And that's kind of how I got started with the whole thing.
Awesome. Awesome. I mean, it sounds like your interest is not too dissimilar to how a lot of us get into the field itself. I personally, my previous 2 degrees are in euphonium, and kind of found out about this field just during my year off in between my bachelor's and my master's, and I kind of just kept going forward with it, and then ended up coming here. So it sounds like we all have pretty similar paths to this point. Speaking on some of that woodwind research, I'm familiar with a little bit of it. Is there any particular study that you found particularly impactful as you're during your path as a researcher, as an administrator, performer?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that kind of drove me in those early years, and this is going back almost 25 years ago, but one of the things that drove me was a belief that performers and teachers should be involved in this kind of research, that the practitioners needed to know about what the musician health issues were in order to more effectively teach the instrument, in order to more effectively teach students to apprise them of what the risks and hazards might be, and to teach in a good, healthy, constructive way that would promote student success. So that's what kind of drove, my desire to be involved. So 1997, 1998, that general time frame, one of the early studies that was taking place there at North Texas was a broad survey of musicians' health. And at the time, it was kind of a novel approach at the time, but we were using the internet, which was still in its somewhat infancy,
Mhm.
to collect data. And again, that was a novel idea at the time because prior to that, surveys had always been either personal one-on-one interviews or paper surveys or that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So we were collecting that data, and me being involved with the Clarinet Association, I really got involved with trying to build a pool of individuals who would take the survey and provide data that can be analyzed. So that led to a paper that we produced in 1998, I suppose it was, which was a comprehensive evaluation of medical problems reported among the clarinet playing community. And we published that. We presented it, I guess it was 1998. It was published in the Clarinet Journal shortly thereafter. And I think we really found some interesting information that had not been discussed in the literature prior to that point. Once we did that, why stop at one study? Why not keep moving forward? So we did, and we moved into some related instrument studies. We did a follow-up study on saxophone players. At the time, I was teaching some saxophone as well, and that one was particularly interesting because we were really able to kind of divide the pool, the subject pool, into two categories: musicians who identified primarily as jazz and commercial musicians, and those who identified primarily as classical musicians. And it allowed for some really interesting cross comparison between these populations who played the same instrument but kind of approached it from different perspectives, or primarily worked in different genres.
Mhm.
And then once we did that, we followed it up with one more study looking at double reed players.
Mhm.
Just kind of being comprehensive with women players. So we looked at oboists and bassoonists. And these studies kind of came out in quick succession: 1998, 2000, 2001, 2002, in that time frame.
Awesome. Yeah, no, having read some of those studies, the findings are extremely interesting. Particularly some of the delineations between, I was just recalling, at least on the double read paper,
Mm-hmm.
some of the, I guess, delineations between like biological sex and different anthropometric structures, I guess, and just some of the stark differences between some of the subsamples in the
Yeah.
study itself were really, really enlightening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those were things that popped up in several of those studies. The original study, the clarinet study, definitely showed um, different results dependent on, for example, gender.
Hmm.
And that was surprising to see such stark contrast in the population.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, So one of the earlier projects here, and I know you had a fair amount of involvement in, was the Health Promotion in Schools and Music Initiative. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in commenting on that a little bit, just because it is somewhat of a catalyst for the center's work in terms of kind of spreading it to a more national audience.
Oh, absolutely. So as the center moved forward and as the research publications became more numerous and more information was available, I think one of the great initiatives that Dr. Chesky promoted was this idea of um, developing approaches for incorporating health education into schools of music. And this had not been something that had been broadly discussed or included in curricula, or in standards prior to that time. So I believe the year was 2004. I was teaching as a clarinet professor at North Dakota State University. And in 2004, a conference was organized down in Fort Worth, the Health Promotion in Schools of Music Conference, that was designed to bring together representatives from many different music performance and education organizations and fields. I served that year as the representative from the International Clarinet Association. And of course, we had many people from all across the country who convened on Fort Worth that fall of 2004. And the idea, again, was developing strategies that would allow this type of information, these kinds of conversations to infiltrate higher education and the way we go about teaching music. Ultimately, the goal, I think, was to get this as part of the NASM standards so that this would become a routine part of all accredited music schools' approach to this issue. I remember the conference very well. I still have my notebook from that conference all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of great information presented, good conversations, good networking, I recall, through that conference, and it was productive. So what happened after that? Well, it took some time for that whole movement to gain traction and to receive some level of broad acceptance. And there were several years that passed after that before there was a comprehensive set of standards proposed to the NASM membership for inclusion in the NASM handbook. I was thinking about this in advance of our conversation, trying to remember the exact year when these standards were proposed and voted on. I want to say it was 2011, if memory serves correctly for me, because I was at the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was maybe one of the years it was in Arizona. But I remember the standards were presented to the full NASM membership. There was discussion. There was still even some reticence on representatives at that meeting, but ultimately they were voted upon and the standards were adopted. So I'm sure you and your viewers are quite familiar with these standards now, but the NASM handbook speaks very clearly and specifically about the inclusion of health-related information, that students must be apprised of the health risks, that this information must be shared broadly amongst all, not just students, but also faculty and staff. Mm-hmm. And I was really happy that those standards were adopted. I very much believe in them because of my own experience in working with the center and because of my own experience just in higher education. And I think they've been a big bonus and a big plus, and they've really made a positive impact on the way music institutions operate in the country today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like you had a key hand in at least participating in and witnessing, events, like I said, that are not only catalysts for the center and for our research here. Certainly, basically everything at this point is addressing this issue to improve and address the occupational health and various idiomatic problems that come with being a musician or a performing artist at any point, particularly during the time of study. But just furthering this idea that the occupational health of performing artists is in fact something that needs to be considered on its own merit and not necessarily kind of shoehorned into another larger category or something along those lines. So, and we were talking a little bit about this before the interview, just given the massive interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary effort that is required and will continue to be required to address some of these health issues as we draw from those in the audiology field and the broader medical fields. Practically addressing these standards is something that I've personally seen come up in a lot of conversations with a lot of different stakeholders. And I was wondering if you could comment on maybe some of the ways that you've been addressing these standards at Florida State University or at any of the other institutions you've served at.
Absolutely. So I remember when the standards were adopted, as I said before, there was still reticence. There was still a lot of hesitation and unease among a fair number of music administrators. I don't want to speak for them, but I think some of the concerns had to do with, well, we're not really medical professionals. How can we provide information? We're not trained to do that and so forth. Others, I think, had concerns about litigation. I think they had concerns about, will there be lawsuits over this if somebody develops a problem, will schools be sued? Will individual faculty or administrators be sued? Now, 8, 10 years or so, whatever, after the adoption of these standards, I think those things have proven to be unfounded, that those were unnecessary concerns. And I've certainly heard of no significant problems in relation to those. I think it's an appropriate thing for schools to be doing, and it's certainly something that we have adopted as a routine part of what we do here at Florida State and at other institutions I've served as well. So how do we do it? When I came to Florida State in 2016, I felt like this was an area that needed to be addressed to a certain extent, partly because I believe in this and because of my own experience in this field. But partly because I think that we maybe had not done quite as effective job in getting that information out as we should have. So one of the ways that I addressed it was to incorporate a full module on musicians' health in our orientation process. I believe that this is something that students should be apprised of at the very beginning of their program of study, not towards the end or in the middle, but right when they initiate the program of study. I also find orientation to be a great time to do it because you're pretty much catching everybody right when they start. If you do it in individual classes or something like that, there's always the chance some people will fall through the cracks. So, for example, when we have new graduate student orientation, which we do each fall semester, and I've done that for the past several years in my role as the Associate Dean and Director of Graduate Studies, we have a whole section where we talk about hearing health, where we talk about musculoskeletal and non-musculoskeletal health. And importantly, this would be a more recent development, where we talk about mental health. Because I think, and I'm going to talk more about this later, I hope, I think this is very much an important and significant field that has not historically been addressed to the extent that it should be. So we talk about those things at length, incorporating some of the research that I've done going way back to when I was with the center back in the late 90s, incorporating some research that I've done since then on hearing health and hearing loss, incorporating material published by some of our professional musicians' health organizations, performing arts health organizations. We get that information out there to the students, and we talk about this at length so they are apprised of these things right at the very beginning of their course of study. In addition to that, we also have incorporated much of that material into our student handbooks, our graduate manual, undergraduate manual. Those things are good, and I'm glad to have that information there. That's passive information, meaning it requires the student to go and hunt that out and pull that out. I much prefer doing it actively in our orientation sessions, where I'm presenting this, where it's open for meaningful conversation, discussion, and dialogue. So I found that to be very effective. We also do have and have had for some number of years audiology, hearing health testing, hearing tests provided in the College of Music. We usually do that each fall semester, where an audiologist comes in, and we do this free of charge for any students who want to participate. Our music education area has coordinated that for some number of years. And I think that's just one more layer that we do here to make this information available to students and to assist them in their path. I also, as a matter of course, I also provide one set of earplugs to all of our graduate students day one, just to let them know this is important, value this, we want you to be aware of this, and be attentive to it. So I found these things to be quite useful, quite productive. On a softer side, I also use this information just when I consult with individual students, because it's not uncommon that I'll have a student come in and say, I've got this problem. I'm a pianist and I have this wrist issue or this hand issue, or I've got some other issue. And I certainly feel that my past experience in having worked in this field has informed me and allows me to provide much more meaningful guidance to students. I always refer them to medical professionals if there really is any indication of any problem. but I feel that I'm much more attentive to it, much more aware of what the issues are because of my past experience.
Hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you've fully and wholeheartedly integrated the initiative itself, in
Mhm.
addition to the field of performing arts health into the university. It's
Sure.
pretty inspiring to hear. Um, do you have any like academic research? Well, I mean, I guess a better way to put that, courses available currently. Is that something you're thinking about, or?
We at present we do not have courses specifically for performing arts health in this sense. Now, Florida State has a very large music therapy program, and of course that's there are connections and there is a strong relation to that.
Mhm.
But no, we haven't crafted courses quite in the way that you all have there at North Texas. Although I think that's certainly a field that we could explore as we
Mhm.
continue to look forward to the future.
And that's interesting. I some time ago I'd been interested in music therapy programs, and of course, y'all's came up as
Mhm.
definitely one of the
Mhm. Mhm.
larger institutions in that field. Can you comment at all about maybe the connections between these efforts in performing arts health and the music therapy program? Are they symbiotic? Has there been contribution from both sides, or I guess just the relationship at large?
Yeah, I would say that there are connections, and certainly our music therapy program and some of our music therapy faculty, um, I think, are attentive to these kinds of things. I would say probably the research interests and the directions have not been an exact parallel to what the center has done there in Denton. I will say that our music therapy research is focused on several areas. Um, Music therapy with regards to infants, for example, and also music in special education, using music to work with those with disabilities or other specific special needs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear. Because we have the kind of unique situation in Denton where we have the performing arts health focus here, and then over at Texas Women's University they have a pretty sizable um, music therapy program, and there's been some interesting contact between us, just talking about various ideologies and things like that. So I'm always curious about how those entities interact. Um, One thing I find, at least here, of course, there's a couple of us that are, full-time PhD students. The research, that's what we came here for. That's what we do, and that's what we spend the bulk of our time on. But a lot of, including yours, but a lot of meaningful research in this area has come from people that initially came in interested in performance or education. We have some musicology students, disciplines like that, and have kind of slowly but surely gotten into this field and become more and more interested and have contributed very valuable and insightful research to the literature overall. I was wondering if you had any insight as to how you might recommend encouraging somebody to get into that field, or if there's or I don't know, parallels that you've noticed in students you've overseen who've become interested in the field.
Sure. Well, maybe I can just talk about my own experience. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but
Right.
my own experience was as being, a clarinet performer and a clarinet teacher. I didn't get a PhD in music education. My field was a performance field,
Hmm.
but I was convinced, and I continue to be convinced that um, practitioners need to be involved in the research side of things. Practitioners, I could argue, should take the lead in those kinds of things in terms of exploring the hows and the whys and the practical application of research knowledge and information. Um, so, this kind of governs just my own thinking about graduate education in general.
Hmm.
That graduate students, including performance students, including conducting students, um, that those folks, need to be able to do more than just play an instrument or sing or conduct. They need to be able to really take the lead in exploring the pedagogy of their field, the needs of students, the direction of the field, all of these underlying currents that go along with what it means to be a performing musician.
Hmm.
So, I think that's one thing that I would say to graduate students now who are interested in exploring these fields is, hey, that's fantastic. You should be, as a doctoral student, you should be taking the lead in getting to these types of informational areas that will inform your discipline in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great mindset to have. Are there any other topics that you really want to get after, you want to talk about?
There is, and
Okay.
I touched on this earlier, but I
Yes.
really would like to bring this up more, and that's this subject of the mental health of
Absolutely.
musicians and music students. So, this has been a topic the last several years, I'd say the last 5 or 6 years, that's really been increasing in importance. I was at an NASM meeting 2 years ago, I guess it was, in Washington, D.C. We had some really good presentations on mental health issues related to college students in general, but music students as well. And while the presentations were good, one thing that seemed quite clear was that there's not nearly enough research. There's not nearly enough data concerning how music students are doing in terms of their mental and emotional health. Anecdotally, in my work here at Florida State, we have a very large graduate population, very large student population. And I would say, excuse me, in my experience, anecdotally, I've certainly been seeing an increase
Hmm.
in the number of students who come to the office experiencing depression, experiencing anxiety. I mean, we talked about performance anxiety for many years. That's kind of an older topic, but
Hmm.
just anxiety in a general sense,
Hmm.
self-doubt, uncertainty about the future, problems with self-esteem, um, all of these kinds of things. It seems to me that these types of problems are reaching epidemic levels among college students. Why? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. I mean, I could speculate. Issues like the rise of social media, cyberbullying, all these kinds of things could be factors influencing where college students are right now. But I think it's quite evident that it's a significant problem that's getting worse. And all of that was before the events of the last 10 months, the events of the COVID 19 pandemic, the events related to even further isolating these students, taking away from them one of their primary emotional outlets, performing together in normal settings.
Hmm.
And so I'm afraid that the pandemic may aggravate the health crisis and maybe push it even more out of control. I'm concerned about our own students. I'm concerned because I don't even see them like we used to, and I used to have students, by this time of the semester, people are coming in and they're all stressed out because of exams and recitals and all these kinds of things. But now I'm concerned because I don't see them. And I'm afraid they're at home uh, really struggling, really
Hmm.
struggling, and nobody is even there to be able to help them. So one thing that I would suggest as an area in vital need of real research is the mental health of musicians in general and student musicians in particular. And I'm very hopeful that that will receive increased attention in coming years.
No, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. It is a vital area of research that is largely underserved.
Mm,
That's admittedly a lot of my initial interest. It's why I ended up coming here, is a keen interest in the mental health side of things, and that's
mm,
where a lot of my research is going towards right now. We've built up some really nice relationships with the Center for Sports Psychology here at UNT, which has provided really insightful research into some extremely analogous literature, not only in the worlds of like performance, but also just the mental aspect of operating in this kind of occupation,
Hmm.
and how it has, I guess, extraneous influence, right? But also, in addition, recently there's been a relationship being built with the educational psychology department, and there's some research efforts going on in the center here with their help. So there's definitely some things moving forward, but I would agree, it's yeah, it's a complicated interdisciplinary effort that does need to be moved forward.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's nothing short of reassuring and inspiring to hear hear your emphasis on it, and hear how much you're focusing on it. It's certainly comforting to me as a researcher and as a student, obviously. Um, but yeah, no, thank you. That's
Good.
yeah.
Well, maybe there'll be some possibilities for partnership in the future.
Absolutely. Always, always. And thank you for all for your wealth of knowledge on these subjects. It's extremely interesting because, of course, with this field, we do hear a lot of, obviously, the opinions involved of those directly, and those involved directly with the center, and we kind of stay in this UNT bubble. But it's super awesome to hear that from the experiences and knowledge of people that did participate in our continuing this effort at other institutions. It's very awesome to hear.
Well, absolutely. Well, Chris is a dear friend. He and I go way back, and I've got to say he's an amazing person, and he really, back in the day, he really promoted this. I think by sheer force of will. He was
Mhm.
so focused on it and so devoted, and 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 he made this thing take off. He had support and help, but he was the driving force. And so I just can't say enough good things about my friend.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. That is our time today. Thank you so much, Dr. Thrasher, for talking to us today. And thank you so much to those turning in to Setting the Stage. We hope you tune into our next episode. You can find these episodes on our YouTube page or on the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health website under the Setting the Stage banner. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Brian. Have a good day.
You as well.